This is also a time of change for my family.
The air in the room turned ice cold. I watched Prince William become completely motionless, his gaze locked onto his aunt. Beside him, Catherine sat in utter disbelief. Her hand went to her mouth, her dark eyes filling with tears she desperately tried to hold back. This was not typical family friction. This was a systematic attempt to undermine her future before she ever reached the throne. Over 9 agonizing months, I watched a silent, calculated game play out behind the high stone walls of Windsor Castle, disguised as routine care.
I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you personally for all the wonderful messages of support and for your understanding.
The public saw a recovering princess stepping carefully back into the light, greeted by massive crowds and overwhelming affection. But inside the corridors of power, every wave, smile, and headline was being tracked like a threat. It all came to a head in a small, closed parlor, with no cameras and no warning. Princess Anne sat across from Prince William and Princess Catherine, placing a thick blue leather folder onto the mahogany table. She closed the cover, looked directly into Catherine's eyes, and made it clear she could no longer remain silent about what Queen Camilla had been saying behind her back. For months, Catherine had accepted sudden changes to her schedule with quiet grace. When her speaking time was cut down, she agreed. When a photo setup was altered, placing her further down the line, she assumed it was a logistical decision to protect her health. She trusted the system, but as Anne opened that folder, the horrifying truth hit the room. Every change had been part of a strategy to shrink her presence. What made the betrayal so cruel was the extraordinary duplicity behind it. While Camilla smiled warmly for cameras next to Catherine in public, she was raising unsettling questions behind closed doors, quietly casting doubt on Catherine's fortitude to stand alongside William as future queen. Who protects you when the threat sits at your own table? How do you defend against whispers you never hear until the damage is done? King Charles sat at the head of the table, visibly startled. He had been told these schedule adjustments were based on workload and medical prudence. He had no idea the official language had been sanitized by briefing writers to cover up a personal campaign of containment. Anne did not raise her voice. Her rhythm was calm, clinical, and devastatingly precise. She laid out specific dates and private conversations from the preceding months. Staff members across multiple departments had heard the same message. Catherine was becoming too popular. Her emotional pull was overshadowing the current reign, and her influence had to be controlled. Catherine listened as years of quiet dedication were reframed as a political threat. She had carried the weight of public expectation without a single misstep. Yet, in private, her genuine public warmth was being characterized as a dangerous distraction. The tension in that parlor was suffocating. William's jaw tightened, his breathing slow and measured, suppressing a fury that threatened to erupt. He demanded to know how long these internal memos had been circulating without his household's knowledge. Hi viewers, was Princess Anne right to step forward and tell Catherine the truth about what was happening behind her back? Leave a simple yes or no in the comments below. And please, hit that subscribe button and join our community right here as this story unfolds. Anne turned to a fresh sheet inside the blue folder, revealing a specific 4-word phrase buried at the bottom of an administrative memo. It did not mention health or recovery. It explicitly directed staff to control the sympathies of the public. That single line proved that every shortened speech was executed with precision to keep Catherine down. Then came the revelation that cut deeper than any institutional sabotage. Anne revealed that Camilla had invoked the memory of Princess Diana, suggesting behind closed doors that Catherine's public affection was not truly her own, but merely borrowed from a ghost. It was a vicious attempt to strip away her individuality and frame her genuine connection as an unearned illusion. Catherine's composure shattered completely. A single tear escaped down her cheek. William moved closer, placing a hand gently over hers in silent protection. But Princess Anne was not finished. She looked across at Charles and Camilla, paused, and prepared to reveal the final piece of evidence that would alter the royal family forever. To understand how a future queen was brought to tears in a closed parlour at Windsor Castle, you have to follow the quiet paper trail back 9 months. I spent weeks piecing this timeline together, tracing every memo, every schedule change, and every secret meeting. It all started with a public return. After months away from the spotlight, Princess Catherine stepped back into her official duties. The public reaction was staggering. Massive crowds lined the streets for miles. Families stood in freezing rain just to catch a brief glimpse of her. Children reached through security barriers, hoping to touch her sleeve. By nightfall, every smile made international headlines. It felt deeply personal to the public. People shared an emotional bond with her because she had fought a quiet, agonizing battle behind closed doors while protecting her children. Her return felt like a victory for everyone watching. That public love was natural. It was unscripted. But inside the cold administrative offices of the palace, I discovered that her emotional pull was viewed not as a triumph, but as a threat. Numbers do not lie. Within weeks of Catherine's return, internal palace tracking reports revealed a stark, troubling shift. Media coverage for King Charles and Queen Camilla dropped sharply whenever Catherine stepped into the spotlight. A single subdued gesture from Catherine generated more headlines than a week of formal royal tours. Jealousy was never spoken out loud in staff meetings. It did not need to be. Instead, a series of subtle, calculated adjustments began to take place behind closed doors. The first moves were small enough to ignore. At a high-profile diplomatic reception, Catherine's scheduled speaking time was suddenly cut in half without explanation. At the very next event, her standing position in the official photograph was shifted down the line, moving her further away from the king. Then came the language. Official briefing documents quietly stopped referring to her as the future queen, substituting generic administrative phrasing instead. Her office was told the changes were made for consistency. Catherine accepted every single modification without complaint. She believed the system was looking out for her. She assumed the palace was simply managing public expectations while protecting her health. She was wrong. How do you defend yourself against an attack disguised as routine protocol? You cannot. Not when you do not even realize you are standing on a battlefield. When engagement itineraries began arriving just hours before departure, leaving her team scrambled, Catherine still did not complain. When photo setups placed her completely out of frame with Prince William, she quietly complied. She trusted the institutional machinery around her, but I watched as Princess Anne began paying close attention to that same machinery. Anne had walked those stone corridors for decades. She knew the precise mechanics of royal administration better than anyone alive. She understood the clear difference between simple organizational chaos and intentional containment. Anne began noticing subtle anomalies that others missed. Private secretaries suddenly stopped responding directly to the Wales household. Senior aides spoke in hushed, guarded tones whenever Catherine's schedule came up. And then, a specific phrase began appearing in unexpected places: public compassion. Anne first heard those 2 words during a quiet lunch with a senior palace assistant. The assistant spoke cautiously, describing an internal meeting where concerns were raised that sympathy for Catherine was distorting the balance inside the monarchy. Anne listened intently. She asked a simple, direct question. Was this concern voiced out of anger? The assistant gave a chilling answer. No. It was voiced with complete, cold calm. A few days later, a second employee recounted a separate discussion held behind closed doors. This time, the language was sharper. The staff member recalled hearing that Catherine had become the emotional center of the entire royal family, and that her soaring popularity was becoming dangerous for the current reign. Once again, Anne asked if the comment was tied to Catherine's health or her ongoing recovery. Once again, the answer was no. It was entirely about influence. Anne did not react immediately. She waited, she observed. I watched her bide her time while Catherine continued showing up fully prepared, extending warm greetings to staff, and standing beside Queen Camilla with the exact same deference she had always displayed in public. To me, that image was the most heartbreaking part of this entire investigation. Catherine was publicly demonstrating total loyalty to the crown, while secret questions were being raised about her position, her power, and her future. Questions she was never given the chance to answer. The breaking point came when Anne intercepted a private briefing paper buried deep beneath routine paperwork on royal continuity. Tucked near the bottom of a page discussing upcoming ceremonial appearances was a direct recommendation to lower Catherine's public visibility. The document suggested reducing her presence at major state events, so the palace could re-evaluate how much attention was directed toward the Wales household. Beneath that proposal sat 4 distinct, underlined words that made Anne's blood run cold. Control the sympathies of the public. There it was, written in black ink on official royal stationery. Anne read the line twice. In an instant, she realized that the private remarks were not casual complaints. They were directives. Rumors leave no trace, but paper trails leave fingerprints. Anne folded the document, placed it inside a dark blue folder, and carried it off. She knew that if she brought this to light too soon, palace officials would dismiss it as a simple misunderstanding, but if she waited too long, personal resentment would become official policy. Anne began her own quiet investigation. Over the next 3 weeks, she arranged 3 separate, off-the-record meetings with senior household staff. She did not make wild accusations. She simply asked direct, pointed questions. And with every conversation, the truth grew darker. The first staff member admitted that pressure had been applied to restrict how often Catherine appeared beside King Charles. The second employee revealed that briefing notes regarding Catherine's future duties were being systematically altered before reaching the King's desk. But it was the third staff member who dropped the ultimate bombshell, confirming that the order to limit Catherine's influence had come directly from Queen Camilla's immediate circle. Anne knew she could no longer remain silent. The stage was set for a confrontation that would rock the monarchy to its core. But what no one in that room realized was that the blue folder contained one final, devastating detail: a hand-edited seating chart for an upcoming state dinner that proves just how far this campaign really went. You cannot afford to miss what happened when that folder was finally opened. Armed with the blue folder, Princess Anne refused to act on mere rumor. She knew how palace whisper campaigns worked. Gossip dissolves the moment you confront it, but written directives leave an unerasable paper trail. Over 7 tense days, she conducted 3 clandestine interviews with household staff who had been quietly forced to implement these changes. I tracked down the transcripts of what those insiders revealed behind closed doors. The first witness was a veteran logistics coordinator who had spent 15 years organizing royal tours. In a quiet, windowless room inside St. James's Palace, the assistant sat down with Anne. The staffer confessed that explicit instructions had come down from senior officials aligned with Queen Camilla. The directive was clear: Catherine's public profile needed to be systematically dialed back. Why? Because her emotional connection with the public was deemed dangerous to the current reign. Dangerously influential. Think about that phrase. A future queen, loved by millions, branded an institutional threat simply because her genuine warmth outshone a formal crown. The second witness was a senior briefing writer. This individual exposed an even deeper, far more personal cut. During a private planning session regarding autumn royal engagements, Camilla had described Catherine using 3 sharp words: too fragile, too shielded by empathy. It was a calculated psychological frame. By labeling Catherine's painful medical battle as personal weakness, Camilla was subtly constructing an argument that Catherine lacked the fortitude to stand alongside William when the time came. Her recovery was transformed into a weapon against her future. Then came the third witness, a visual presentation director. This employee admitted that direct instructions were given to alter media coverage at joint events. Whenever Catherine stood near King Charles, photographers and production teams were instructed to frame the shots to reduce her prominence. Her speech lengths were trimmed. Her arrival routes were shifted. Every single modification was officially presented to Catherine as a caring gesture to allow her time to rest. But beneath that polite lie sat a cold, calculated campaign of containment. Anne had seen enough. She did not wait for an official committee meeting. She did not request a formal audience through administrative channels. She waited until a routine scheduling conference at Buckingham Palace ended, and the staff quietly filed out of the room. Once the heavy oak door clicked shut, Anne turned to face Queen Camilla alone. No aides, no cameras, no witness records, just two powerful women inside the world's most guarded institution. Anne did not shout. She did not indulge in emotional outbursts. Her rhythm was low, measured, and razor-sharp. She looked directly at Camilla and asked a single, unwavering question. Had she told senior staff that Catherine was too delicate for her future responsibilities? Camilla did not flinch. She did not deny it. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and offered a cold, unyielding defense. She claimed someone in the leadership needed to look at the institution without sentimental blinders. She argued that public sympathy was warping the traditional hierarchy of the monarchy, insisting that popularity was not equivalent to constitutional authority. In Camilla's mind, Catherine's overwhelming public devotion was not an asset to be celebrated, but a volatility that needed to be strictly managed. Anne listened in complete silence. Then she drew a firm, non-negotiable line. She warned Camilla never again to use Catherine's health as proof of incapacity. She warned her never to use administrative trickery to weaken the Wales household. And then came the sharpest warning of all. Anne made it explicitly clear that Princess Diana's legacy was not a political tool to be weaponized in palace power plays. The silence in that room was suffocating. Camilla stared back at Anne with quiet defiance. She remarked that Anne was letting personal affection cloud her institutional judgment. She refused to apologize. She refused to withdraw the briefing papers. She made it clear that her vision for the monarchy would not yield to sentimental bonds. When the meeting ended, nothing changed. The palace machinery continued to operate, as if the warning had never been delivered. No briefing memo was recalled. No apology was sent to Catherine's team. In fact, the defiance escalated. Just 48 hours after that confrontation, a junior staff member standing in a hallway near a private sitting room overheard Camilla speaking with a senior advisor. Through the slightly open door, Camilla's voice carried clearly. She stated that Anne was becoming overly protective and meddling where she did not belong. But then came the sentence that shattered any remaining hope for internal reconciliation. Camilla declared that Catherine's entire public standing was built on quicksand. She claimed Catherine was merely living in Diana's shadow, borrowing public affection from a ghost, and that once the public realized her strength was an illusion, her influence would evaporate. When that staff member brought those exact words to Princess Anne, the final decision was made. Private warnings had failed. Quiet diplomacy had failed. Staying silent to protect the royal image had only allowed the poison to spread deeper into official policy. Anne realized there was only one path left. She had to lay the receipts directly on the table in front of King Charles, Prince William, and Catherine herself. She placed the transcript inside the blue folder. Sitting right next to it was the most damning document of all, a piece of evidence that proved this was no longer just verbal hostility, but an active, written attempt to rewrite Catherine's place in royal history. What happened next when Anne walked into that closed parlour at Windsor Castle went far beyond a typical family disagreement. It became an unprecedented constitutional showdown. When Prince William saw the contents of that blue folder, his reaction was quiet, immediate, and terrifyingly absolute. But the single detail that truly broke Catherine's heart, the moment that brought tears streaming down her face, was a hand-annotated seating chart for an upcoming state dinner. It was a formal document where Catherine's name had been quietly moved 3 seats away from her husband, intentionally pushed out of the central camera frame. You cannot afford to miss what happened when Prince William saw that chart and delivered his ultimatum to the king. The private parlour at Windsor Castle smelled of old oak, damp autumn rain, and cold tea. The official briefing had just concluded. Private secretaries had gathered their leather folios, stepped quietly out into the carpeted corridor, and pulled the massive oak doors firmly shut. 5 people remained inside that room: King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, Princess Catherine, and Princess Anne. The air was thick, suffocating, and heavy with unspoken dread. I watched Princess Anne reach into her lap, lift the dark blue leather folder, and lay it flat against the dark mahogany table. She did not open it right away. She kept her hands rested over the blue cover, her eyes fixed directly on Queen Camilla, and let the silence stretch until every breath in that room became audible. No one moved. No one spoke. How do you fight a quiet war when the enemy uses official stationery as a shield? I watched Anne open the folder. The sound of paper turning echoed like a gunshot in that quiet room. She took out the first typed transcript and slid it smoothly across the polished wood, stopping it directly in front of King Charles. "We are going to address what has been said," Anne stated, her voice dangerously calm, level, and entirely devoid of warmth. She extended a single finger and pointed to a highlighted line at the top of the white page. It was the transcript from the St. James's Palace planning meeting, the exact record of the words Camilla had spoken behind closed doors. Catherine was too fragile. Catherine was too delicate. Catherine was too emotionally compromised to carry the future weight of the crown. Camilla's eyes narrowed, but her face remained remarkably calm. She did not flinch. She rested her elbows on the arms of her chair, folded her hands, and offered a cold, practiced defense. She claimed her statements were being stripped of their proper context. She argued she was merely expressing maternal concern for a recovering princess under relentless public pressure, workload management, medical prudence, institutional care. Those were the soft, polite excuses her office had fed to King Charles for 9 long months. It was a brilliant lie. I watched Anne turn to a second page inside the folder. She did not engage in a debate over intent. She simply presented the hard, unassailable evidence. She pointed to 3 separate administrative memos where that exact word, fragile, had been cited as the official reason to slash Catherine's public speech times, cut her engagement hours, and move her to the edges of official photographs. The paper trail proved that every time Catherine was told her schedule was being reduced for her health, it was actually being done to diminish her presence. King Charles pulled the document closer, his brow furrowed as his eyes scanned the text. He had personally approved those schedule adjustments, fully believing they were requested by Catherine's own medical team. Now he was staring at undeniable proof that his royal authority had been manipulated to execute a private grudge. Then came the second revelation. The moment the room went entirely cold, Anne slid a third page across the table. This was a direct transcript from a confidential briefing session held weeks earlier. On that page sat a single, horrific sentence spoken by Camilla. It stated that as the monarchy transitioned into its next phase, Catherine's public role would need to be strictly regulated, and that she would eventually have to be replaced if her popularity continued to eclipse the king. Replaced. The word hung over the mahogany table like a suspended blade. King Charles looked up from the paper, his face turning pale. He turned his head slowly to look directly at his wife. "Did you say this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Camilla did not answer. She stared straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. Her silence was her absolute confession. Beside Catherine, Prince William became completely, terrifyingly still. He did not raise his voice. He did not slam his hand on the table. His body locked, his shoulders rigid, his eyes turning to absolute ice as he fixed his gaze on Camilla. It was a cold, calculated rage, the quiet kind of anger that signals a point of no return. Look closely at what was happening in that room. The institution was eating itself from the inside out. Anne reached into the blue folder one more time. She looked directly at Catherine, her expression softening just a fraction, and warned her that the final document was the hardest to hear. Anne read the words aloud. In a private conversation with senior staff, Camilla had declared that Catherine's public affection was entirely unearned. She asserted that Catherine was merely living in Princess Diana's shadow, trading on borrowed sympathy from a ghost, and that her genuine connection with the public was nothing more than a temporary illusion. The words hit the room with devastating force. Catherine did not scream. She did not argue. Her breath hitched in her throat. I watched a single tear break over her lower eyelid and trace a slow, painful path down her pale cheek. Her hand came up to cover her mouth, her body trembling slightly as 9 months of confusion, unexplained schedule cuts, and quiet isolation suddenly made complete sense. Every time she had wondered if she had done something wrong, every time she had accepted a last-minute itinerary change without complaint, she had been walking into a trap set by her own family. Why do we look for threats on the outside when the deepest betrayals happen at our own dinner tables? Catherine wiped her cheek with a trembling finger, took a deep, shuddering breath, and looked up. She did not look at Camilla. She looked at the quiet room around her. Then, in a voice that was barely louder than a whisper, but cut through the stillness like shattered glass, she asked the question that stripped away the last remaining lie. How many people stood next to me, smiled in my face, and knew this was happening? No one answered her. King Charles looked down at his hands, deeply shaken by the realization that his own administrative team had been weaponized against his daughter-in-law. Camilla attempted one final defense, arguing that a monarchy cannot be guided by raw emotion and that public sentiment was a dangerous, unstable foundation for authority. William cut her off. He did not shout. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and placed his hand firmly over Catherine's shoulder. His physical stance made one thing undeniably clear. The Wales household was done playing by the palace's hidden rules. William looked directly at King Charles and delivered a quiet, non-negotiable directive. From that exact second, the Wales household would take total, exclusive control over Catherine's schedule, public appearances, and security. No outside briefing writer would ever touch her itinerary again. As Catherine rose from her chair, her dignity intact, despite the tears on her face, Princess Anne pulled one last document from the dark blue folder. It was the master seating chart for an upcoming state banquet, a formal paper where Catherine's name had been pencil-marked 3 seats down from her husband, intentionally positioned out of view of the primary broadcast cameras. When Prince William saw that hand-annotated seating chart, he made a ruthless decision that permanently altered the internal structure of the royal family. You cannot afford to miss what happens in the final chapter of this story, where I reveal the official written mandate King Charles was forced to sign, the devastating response William delivered directly to Camilla, and the unseen power shift that changed the British monarchy forever. Anne laid the final sheet of paper onto the dark wood. It was not a speech transcript or a summary of staff interviews. It was a detailed layout diagram for an upcoming state banquet. I watched King Charles lean forward, drawing the white page toward him under the warm light of the parlor. Beside Catherine's name, drawn in light pencil, was a clear correction mark. Her placement had been shifted 3 seats down the long table, moving her away from Prince William and out of view of the primary television cameras. The room was dead quiet. Who gave that order? Who authorized a change meant to hide the future queen in plain sight? Camilla attempted to break the silence, offering a rapid explanation about international protocol, seating arrangements, and foreign dignitaries. But Charles raised his hand, cutting her off before she could finish a single sentence. I watched the king slowly close the dark blue leather folder. The sound of that heavy cover shutting was quiet, sudden, and final. Charles looked across at his son. Then he looked at Catherine. The comfortable veil of administrative ignorance had been completely torn away. He could no longer pretend these subtle adjustments were about workload, recovery, or medical prudence. A line had been crossed inside his own household, and the evidence was lying right in front of him. Charles issued a binding royal mandate right then and there. From that exact second, every decision regarding Princess Catherine's schedule, public appearances, ceremonial positioning, and media releases would belong exclusively to the Wales household. No outside offices, no unapproved edits, no quiet adjustments behind closed doors. If an administrative change was ever proposed, it would require the direct written sign-off of Prince William and Princess Catherine. It was not an apology, It was a firm institutional boundary drawn in real time. Catherine stood up from the table. She adjusted her jacket, her hand steady, though the tear tracks were still faint against her skin. She did not look at Camilla. She did not engage in a final argument. She turned toward Princess Anne, meeting her gaze across the table. There were no dramatic speeches, no emotional outbursts, just a quiet, dignified nod of profound gratitude. Anne returned the gesture with an unflinching look of respect. I watched Prince William take Catherine's hand, guiding her toward the heavy oak doors. Before leaving, William stopped at the threshold, turned back, and fixed his gaze on the room one last time. His message was understood without a single word being spoken. They walked out of that closed parlor together, leaving the remaining royals in absolute heavy silence. When the door clicked shut, King Charles turned to Princess Anne. He asked her if it had truly been necessary to expose every single word in front of the entire family. Anne's response was swift, level, and uncompromising. She told him that if the palace expected loyalty from Catherine in public, it owed her radical honesty in private. Silence can protect appearances, but silence eventually destroys institutions from within. Nothing was the same after that afternoon at Windsor Castle. On the surface, the royal machinery kept turning exactly as it always had. The public continued to see bright smiles, flawless walkabouts, and polished official photographs. Catherine and Camilla could still be seen standing near each other at formal ceremonies. William could still walk beside his father during official processions. To the outside world, the royal family appeared united, stable, and unbreakable. But behind those historic stone walls, the balance of power had permanently shifted. William stopped accepting unexplained schedule changes from central administration. Catherine stopped assuming that every last-minute adjustment was made in good faith. She now understood precisely where the resistance was coming from. She knew which decisions needed to be questioned. She knew which whispers were designed to tear her down. And Queen Camilla realized something far more dangerous. She realized that Princess Anne was not afraid to gather receipts, follow the paper trail, and lay the truth directly on the table. Catherine had been brought to tears in that quiet parlor, but she walked out of it with something she had never truly possessed before: total clarity. She was no longer a passive figure, trusting a system that sought to contain her. She was a future queen who understood the full weight of the game being played around her. This closed-door showdown at Windsor was only the beginning of a much larger, secret power struggle inside the royal corridors. The blue folder opened a door that can never be closed again. There is a deeper, unrevealed layer to this story that goes far beyond that single meeting. In my next deep dive investigation, I'm going to expose the handwritten note found tucked behind Catherine's name in the state archives, the specific senior royal official who gave the secret order to alter the seating chart before guests arrived, and the explosive letter William sent to the Lord Chamberlain's office that redefined the rules of the court forever. Everything changes with that single document. Hit that subscribe button and join our community right here as this story unfolds.